Football!
And what's up? Welcome in another episode of GC Live. Appreciate you joining us. I am Wes Mitchell. He is, of course, Chris Clark. We are brought to you, as always, by our buddy Clint Hammond of Movement Mortgage, 803-771-6933. As always, if you're in the market for a new home or just want to see what options you may have out there, want to check in on the interest rates, the Movement Mortgage team under Clint can take care of you. Again, same great team, new name. You've heard us talk about Mortgage Network for actually a couple years now. Same crew now under the Movement Mortgage umbrella. Again, clint.hammond.com, 803-771-6933, so I can get in touch with Clint. Hope y'all are great. Again, I'm Wes. He is Chris, going to be joined momentarily by our buddy Charles Power. He is the director of rankings at On3. Looking forward to hearing from Charles. I know many of you maybe joined in last time we had Charles on. We talked about LaNorris Sellers for like an hour, I think. But we'll be talking about him, talking about Vicari Swain, and Charles' official title, the On3 Director of Scouting and Rankings, which essentially means he knows everything about everybody that is a major recruit. Charles been doing this for a while. He's been high on LaNorris for quite some time. Been high on Vicari for quite some time. So we're going to get Charles to tell us a little bit about why those guys are ranked what they are. And final On3 rankings out now, Chris. Those were official. We're recording this and live streaming this on Wednesday. Those were official on Tuesday. And some Gamecocks getting some nice little bumps there.
Yeah, man. So something I'm looking forward to asking Charles about. He went into great detail on LaNorris Sellers. Last time, obviously, we had him on, but get him to talk a little bit more about that. But I really want him to dive in on Swain. So I think the word that he used last time we had him on the show was a ridiculous athlete. And when you look at this guy on film, you can see that, right? And he really, really flew under the radar for Gamecock fans, I feel like, until the very end of the process. And why? Well, somebody else wanted him. And anytime that happens, that tends to kind of put a guy in the news, so to speak, a little bit more. And then people start looking at him and say, oh, yeah, this guy is really good. You know, Coach Prime, Deion Sanders, Colorado, they have occupied a lot of the recruiting news cycle and the college football news cycle. And so when they started chasing Swain, it got people's ears perked up a little bit more. I figured he would move up some in the rankings, but Wes, he landed way up there in terms of the On3 rankings, and now is a guy that Gamecock fans maybe are going to be even more excited about now, given where he's ended up in Charles's rankings.
Yes, and I think, Chris, one of the best things about the whole On3 system, hopefully y'all can see that. Yeah, you can. The whole On3 system is that. So first of all, you go on here, and there is still some confusion, I think, especially if people are more not the ones. So before I did this, I followed recruiting like closely. Like I followed every little visit, who was hitting campus, who did South Carolina offer. And there are people that follow it like that. Then there are people that follow it in a much more casual sense. And I think, you get hit over the head with content from everywhere now. So I get it. You can't follow everything as far as every little beat. But so I think people see On3 and then they just kind of add two things together here. Well, the On3 rankings and the On3 consensus rankings are completely different. Just like I think there are people, especially when it first launched, that with Garnet Trust and Garnet Trust Foundation just completely linked the two as being the same thing when they are not. So On3 And the rankings we were talking about today with Charles are the rankings put together by the On3 team that Charles is the director of. Well, this is no different than like ESPN has rankings, 24/7 has rankings, Rivals has rankings. This is the individual rankings from the On3 company. Well, you also, Chris, have, of course, the On3 consensus. That is an average of all of the 4 major recruiting entities. And I like that there's some transparency there too. It's like, hey, it's the 4, it's divided by 4, and then it's normalized into a mathematical rating. And so you're gonna have guys always, Chris, that maybe one site, one company feels differently about than the rest of them. 76 says who are in the consensus rankings. Yeah, ESPN, Rivals, 24/7, On3. It's the 4 major companies that do rankings. So that gives you more of like, it is what it is. It's an average. Whereas On3, yeah, there are going to be some outliers. And then on the On3 website, you can actually compare, which we're going to do here in a second. We're going to pop that up. But Chris, consensus is more of like, all right, here's an idea of what pretty much everybody thinks in general. Whereas you can then click through and see which particular companies have different thoughts on different guys.
Yeah, and as you've got up on the screen there, Wes, for those that are watching the video stream, which hopefully you are on YouTube, like under Marquis Anderson, for example, to the right, you see a star rating and a grade, and that is kind of the default to the On3 consensus rating. So when you're just looking on the commitment list, if you go to GamecockCentral.com, click on the football recruiting tab, click on commitments, something you should be checking often, you will see kind of default under the commitment list. That is the consensus ranking. Then you can click on the individual prospect and kind of sort that. Really cool tool by On3. They have pretty robust profiles with all sorts of different stuff and continuing to make improvements, and really not improvements, Wes, but additions to those profiles. The industry comparison tool that you can toggle on and off on the recruit profiles are super cool. And Wes, they actually introduced something new on the rankings, not to further confuse people, but just to kind of let people know it's there. Sometimes you may see a guy that is a 5-star plus. South Carolina does not have one of those right now on their commitment list, but a 5-star plus prospect is a guy that is a 5-star on all 4 of the major recruiting services. He is called a 5-star plus. So just a few things to keep in mind there as you sort through the rankings.
Let's go ahead and bring Charles in. Charles is a 5-star plus in my book. Charles, I know it's always a busy time, man. Appreciate you taking the time. How did the All-Star games go for you, man? Did you have to Uber like 8 hours when all the planes got shut down for a couple days there?
Yeah, it's funny. I'm sure I probably had a similar experience to a lot of South Carolina fans driving down to the bowl game because I got caught in that traffic. I heard people were talking about it before I drove down, so I knew it was going to be pretty bad. But I think getting from Myrtle Beach to like Beaufort, Hilton Head, or getting through Savannah, it took forever. It was like maybe like 6 hours getting through there, and then once I got from Savannah, it was like you could snap your fingers and you were in Orlando. But that stretch of 95 was particularly brutal for sure.
I've never seen anything like it, to be honest with you, man. Like going from Columbia to Jacksonville, like we were in South Carolina for like 4+ hours, I think. And the entire trip was supposed to be 4 hours. So it was brutal. Lots of Gamecock fans on the road going down there, but glad you made it, man. Glad you made it back safe. And obviously we did talk a ton about LaNorris Sellers on the previous time you were on, but maybe some people missed it. Maybe they only caught part of it. So, and the fact that LaNorris is now inside the top 100. He's moved all the way up to 95 in the country. I'm going to throw some of his highlights up here in a second, but just as a refresher, Charles, and for the people who missed it, what was it about LaNorris that you've been so high on him about really since I think you and I we've been talking about him for like a year now, I think, but what has it been about LaNorris that you've just liked so much?
Yeah, I mean, we always liked his physical ability. First off, he's 6'3", 220, live arm. You can see that just really quickly, just in watching him play, or just really watching highlights. So, and I think the arm plus the mobility with the size, his balance, his ability to make improvisational plays. Like I think we talked about this last time, but I think him playing early on at South Florence, when they really kind of struggled to block up front, and him having to make a lot of individual plays with his feet, and just improvisationally, creatively, really helped set him up, just from a play style perspective. He had to really do a lot on his own. So just from a skill set perspective, and I got to see him, like I said, last time I saw him at Clemson's camp going into his junior year. I thought he stacked up with national quarterbacks there from a physical and skill perspective. So the biggest thing I think was just seeing him getting the opportunity to play. Broke his collarbone, I believe, his probably in the 4th game of his junior year. So, man, and I think just tracking him throughout the fall, I think his first game against Goose Creek, he had like 6 or 7 touchdowns, maybe 8 touchdowns. So he was one that like initially just like really like popped on the radar, as there was probably a group of 5 or 6 quarterbacks that we kind of thought might be risers, and that ended up having big senior seasons. And he was one of them that I was just really following on a weekly basis. And then of course, South Carolina came in on him, I guess it was like October. I think Satterfield saw him at the Myrtle Beach game, and then they offered, and he became a priority. But it was a deal where I think Sellers got better and better over the course of the season, which is kind of what you want to see. Played, I think, some of his best ball in the playoffs, in big games. I mean, that's the thing too. I think when you're stacking him up among a lot of these top quarterbacks, I think he played some of the best competition of the group. In addition to really from a big picture perspective, probably had the most productive senior year as well. He had 67 touchdowns, 2 picks, over 1,300 rushing yards, highly efficient as a passer, even though his completion percentage wasn't crazy high. If you watch South Florence games, to be honest, like some of their receivers had trouble handling the velocity on his throws. There probably was more drops than you would, hope for. But if you watch the games, it was easy to see that was just kind of the context for their offense. A lot of it was like vertical play action passes. They weren't really throwing a bunch of easy, quick, padded completions necessarily. So, but yeah, I mean, seeing him take off that like November, December, he really kind of looked like one of the top quarterbacks in the country to us. And then I think getting to see him at the Shrine Bowl, Wes and Chris, I'm sure y'all are familiar with the Shrine Bowl like I am. It's not a setting where quarterbacks go in that game and always look great. Like I think we can go back over the years of some top ranked quarterbacks who did not look great in that game.
Yeah.
So I think the fact that he looked that comfortable in that setting, all of that, the skills translated. I think back like the last Shrine Bowl MVP that like we were a little higher than everybody else, won the Blitnikoff this year, Jalon Hyatt. So I think that can be kind of a little bit of a good sign. It's definitely not a bad thing. So I think just taking the full breadth of what we've seen from him with the skills and the production, the gaudy production, it's hard to deny him as, I think, in my opinion, a top 100 quarterback. And he's a guy who I think, if he pans out at South Carolina, I think we'll look back and say, man, this was like a kind of a steal for the Gamecocks, just given, just his situation and kind of going under the radar, really almost solely because he missed most of his junior year.
And Charles, something that I wanted to get you to expand on, kind of a 2-for-1 here. So number one, I think maybe people don't realize in On3's rankings, correct me if I'm wrong, you guys just rank quarterback, no pro style versus dual threat like in the past, but LaNorris is certainly a guy that could be classified as a dual threat. So the 2-part kind of question for you, in terms of just generally ranking quarterbacks and grouping them, since there is no designation anymore between pro and dual threat, how much do the legs matter to you in terms of running ability? Does that give a guy an extra boost versus someone who doesn't? And then number 2, can you go into a little bit more detail about LaNorris's ability to run the ball? For instance, I know in your piece here in moving him up, you mentioned, size, burst, and contact balance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. That's a great question. And I think us getting rid of the pro style and dual threat designation is really tied into the fact that nowadays to be a top quarterback, you need to have mobility. Like there's like dual threat is the new pro style, essentially. When you look at a lot of top quarterbacks who get drafted high, there's a baseline level of mobility that you really need to have to be a top quarterback. Because like if you're projecting out to college and really the NFL, I think being able to move raises your floor as a quarterback, because if you play early, you probably aren't going to have the offense. Like you're going to know the offense like the back of your hand. So that ability to move affords you time to continue to learn and progress, as a pocket passer. I think ultimately being a pocket passer is what determines who is truly elite at quarterback, especially in the NFL. Like you look in the NFL playoffs, I think the ability to win from the pocket is kind of what decides a lot of those games. But I think the mobility raises the floor. So that's really, when I was working at 24/7 Sports, we talked about that for a while, like kind of getting rid of the dual threat pro style. Because it kind of became a deal where a lot of the pro style quarterbacks just are guys who just couldn't move. And we would have had a lot of the top ranked guys would have been like ranked as dual threats. So I think that's a good question. That's something that really, to me, matters with quarterback evaluations for sure. And I think, I go through every year and study top NFL draft picks, and I look at rushing yards for high school quarterbacks. You have situations maybe like a Trevor Lawrence, where a guy who was a good athlete didn't run for a ton of yards, but you could kind of tell he was a good athlete. But generally speaking, most of these top NFL draft picks, I would say, rush for probably at least 600 or 700 yards their senior year. Sellers, would have been well above that average. But there's some like statistical markers that you can look at with total touchdowns to interceptions per game. Rushing yards is really helpful. So those are all things we factor in, and on all of those benchmarks, he hits all of those very easily. Yards per attempt is one. I think a lot of the top quarterback picks, you see guys with 9 easily. Like rarely do you see one with below, I think, 9 yards an attempt. Sellers was over 11. So from a stats perspective, he is like how you would 100% like would want a guy to look. And with his rushing ability, I think what makes him stick out a little bit in that regard is that he can do it a lot of different ways. So you can call design runs for him. You watch South Florence play, a lot of their run game was their run game. They could line him up almost in like a direct snap, like a wildcat situation, and he was a really kind of hellacious short yardage runner. Great in the red zone and goal line. You saw that in the playoffs a lot. I think he was really good at that in the AC Florida game. Like he kind of took the game over as a ball carrier there. And so I think he adds that element. I think the burst and the balance and the contact balance is unique. There was a play against Hartsville this year. I think it might've been on his highlights where he was scrambling, kind of lost his balance and gathered himself and got back to top speed and took off running. Like that's honestly pretty freakish. Like you don't see that often. And that like we talked about last time, that might be something I think that he got from his soccer background, is just the ability to stay low and change direction. So that's really good. I mean, obviously he has good speed. He's not like a 4.3, 4.4 guy, but I think he's a like electronic 4.6. And I could see him, and that's at 215, 220. So I could see him continuing to get faster there. He's 16 years old, running a laser 4.6 is pretty salty. So, and I think the improvisational ability as well. So he kind of has the multi-phase rushing that you want to see. It's not just one area. So it's just the general athleticism transfers over as a run threat.
Yeah, pretty special guy all the way around, man. That Florida game in particular, everybody in the stadium knew he was getting the ball at times. And it was like they didn't even bother to put a running back beside him at times. I think they just stacked it in front of him and put an extra blocker in there, and we're just like, stop our guy, or attempt to stop our guy, and we're going to convert these 4th and 3rd and shorts, basically. I find it interesting. So the final rankings on On3, Vicari Swain, South Carolina's highest ranked guy, LaNorris second, then Marquis, who's sort of been up there as a top recruit, really on all the services for quite a while. It's kind of interesting to me if these two guys had been sort of as talked about throughout the process, or maybe as early or earlier in the process, I'm trying to say, these would be two guys I think Gamecock fans would have been just clamoring for to land. But because of how it played out, like you talked about with LaNorris getting hurt his junior year, really sort of being under the radar until he has this massive senior year. And Vicari as well, fans were, they were happy to get him. They were excited. It wasn't really until Deion Sanders started poking around and trying to steal him at the end that fans were like, wait, what? Well, what's the deal with this guy? So I think it's interesting, Charles, seeing the two highest ranked guys now kind of being a bit under the radar for most of the process, even in the eyes of South Carolina fans.
Yeah. And I think too, this is one thing that I think maybe factors in a little bit with them is they aren't from traditional powerhouse high schools either. And I think that could have maybe contributed a little bit. Like they aren't at high schools that have college coach foot traffic coming through just to check on guys. I'm not even sure I've heard of Vicari Swain's high school, Central in Carrollton. I mean, Carrollton High School is a powerhouse, but I haven't heard of Central. So it's kind of weird that he wouldn't be playing at Carrollton. But I think that's a factor. And one thing too, like I said this last time, but we heavily value the senior season. I think that's a great indicator of just how good a prospect is going to be when they get into college. It's the most recent like data point sample size. And with Vicari Swain, I guess he moved up probably around 50 spots. I think he was around, just outside the top 100 going into this update. But as we continue to watch him, he's just awesome. Like I think you can see on these clips, and he can play multiple positions. I had one person who works for SEC team tell me he was his favorite player in the cycle period. So I mean, this guy is just twitched up like crazy. I think I might've mentioned this last time. His broad jump at the Atlanta Under Armour camp. I actually went back and looked it up for y'all. It was an 11.6, an 11.5. So just to give you perspective on that, Julio Jones, one of the best athletes at receiver in modern history, jumped an 11.3 at the NFL Combine. So Vicari Swain jumped an 11.6 in socks. So that just kind of gives you an idea of what kind of athlete you have on your hands here. Can do a lot of different stuff. I think it would be a 4-star receiver if he was just strictly a receiver with his ball skills and athleticism. But I think what makes him special is just that athleticism, the ball skills, and the fact that he has some toughness and can really be a game changer at secondary, in the secondary, at corner or safety. So, I mean, he could be like, this is kind of a weird corner class nationally. Like we only have 1 5-star. There's a group of kind of top 100 types. And I think if we were to slot Swain as a corner, he would be kind of right in that second tier group, kind of with your Cormani McLean's, Desmond Ricks's, Jakeem Jackson. So he would be in that vicinity. And he's as good of an athlete, I think, as all those guys, if not better. So a guy who I think you'll like Sellers, I think you'll look back and say, man, he probably should have gotten more attention. I mean, you see that hit right there. I mean, he's pretty vicious and physical. So yeah, I mean, it's just hard. Like his film is so much fun to go through. I mean, he's just extremely twitchy, bouncy. So he's a guy too. And I mean, y'all are definitely more up to speed on South Carolina's depth chart and whatnot than I am. But I would think he's probably got a shot. If he comes in and he might have a shot. He might be ready to contribute, or like he might maybe be in the mix there at spots in the secondary. So that should be fun to watch, at least like once he gets on campus.
Yeah, I mean, certainly receiver or defensive back, South Carolina would have some room for him and capable of playing either. And so that kind of leads me to this next question is also kind of more general, but also applicable to this, Charles. So you mentioned he's an athlete, right? That's how you rank him at On3, is in the athlete category. Plays both ways at receiver, DB. You mentioned he'd be highly ranked at either. How do you determine, okay, I'm slotting this guy as a receiver or a DB or an athlete, especially because some of these guys that are, say in the DB category, they do play oftentimes both ways at the college level. So how do you make that determination of this guy's going in the athlete category like Vicari?
Yeah, that's another really good question. So we try to, probably relative to other outlets, we try to project the actual position and not just lump everybody into athlete. for us, athlete is the kind of definition of athlete is there's general ambiguity on what position he's going to play in college. Most of the time, for us, it applies also to he could play on either side of the ball. So I think with Swain, the fact he could play on both sides of the ball probably is why he's an athlete and not a corner or a safety. And also too, I think where they're recruited, typically we can kind of dig on and just asking college sources or kind of figure out, like, deduce where they're going to start off at in college. So that's a factor as well. But by the time we get to the end of the cycle, like this final rankings, we try not to have a ton of athletes, because I think it's helpful for the fans to know kind of where they're projected to play. And I think just from a product standpoint, it's just more accurate that way. And we aren't scared to project either. Like there will be some safeties that we think will outgrow their position and rank as a linebacker. Like, for instance, we had Nick Eman-Wari as a linebacker last year. And even though he plays safety at South Carolina, I think he could be like an Isaiah Simmons type who maybe starts off safety in college and eventually is like kind of drafted as a hybrid safety linebacker. I could see that given how big he is, his size, and kind of what he brings to the table there. So that's kind of our general philosophy with athletes. And I think it helps too, like kind of how we go through our rankings process is everything starts off positionally. So we go through all the quarterbacks, all the running backs. So it helps us sort out the prospects just a lot cleaner if they're in a position and not just kind of a nebulous athlete category. So we try to pare it down, but I think we do have several athletes in the top 100. Like Nicholas Harbor's one. Like he's a good example of just could play tight end, could play edge. So that's kind of why Swain falls in there. But that's just our general take on it.
And Nick Harbor, one of the just freakiest athletes that exists, you would say. I want to talk a bit as well, when we got you, Charles, about Jalon Kilgore, a guy who, it's not like you guys were down on him before. He was still a high 3-star type. You talked about valuing that all-important senior season. What was it about Kilgore, who it's one of several that's already on campus for South Carolina, already moved in, will go through spring practice, I think probably has a chance to impact their secondary potentially pretty quickly. What did you like about Kilgore to move him, almost into the top 150s, 167 overall in his class?
Yeah, Kilgore's film is phenomenal. His senior tape is awesome. I first off, I think when you're looking at safety, we look at the athleticism and we look at it's kind of just to dumb it down is how good of a football player are they? Can you make plays in multiple phases of the game? I think it's helpful when you see safeties play offense, which we see from Kilgore. I think he had over 1,400 yards this year just on offense, and seeing his playmaking, toughness, the athleticism on defense. I think he's a guy who would probably he's run track before, but I think if he were to go in a combine setting, I think he would perform well there. Like that Atlanta camp, Wes, I'm sure. I think you were there. It rained that day, so they only did like a couple of the testing portions, or a couple of the athletic tests were inside, so they weren't able to run. But I think he's a guy who would have performed pretty well there. I think he's like in the 4.5, maybe like high 4.4 range, at least hand time. So it's just the combination of athleticism and just the playmaking ability, toughness, ability to do different things. And to bring it back to the athleticism, I think he had a 23.5 long jump. So he's, checks the boxes there, at least from a track perspective, what you want to see. And good size. He's like 6'1", 6'2", 200 pounds long. You can kind of see right here, I mean, just the playmaking ability, the balance. I had somebody text me like his highlights in the middle of the fall, and with the comment I think it was just this is an NFL player. And it wasn't someone not affiliated with South Carolina. So going back and going through that safety group, it was really the safety position might have been one of the bigger overhauls for us. There was kind of a group there that was just kind of in that 4-star range that we didn't have a ton of stuff on, both ones who were rated as 4 stars and ones like Kilgore who were kind of on that cusp. So there was a lot of shuffling that went through with this one. And he was, I would say, probably one of 2 or 3 safeties that really stood out to us when we were going through the position group. So he's a guy who I think kind of similar to those others we talked, similar to Sellers and Swain. I think he's a headliner in the class, a guy who can just a pure football player. Correct me if I'm wrong too. I think he might be from a military family, and that's not something we consider, but just from my experience doing this and like covering, like back when I was reporting, those guys I think are wired a little different and tend, I think, to probably hit at a pretty high rate, just, growing up in a military family. So I guess I believe that's true, but if it is, I think that's kind of an interesting note for Kilgore as well.
Yeah. And for those looking at the video stream, Wes has this graphic up here, kind of giving you visual representation of some of these moves up. So Charles, you've mentioned so many factors that you kind of bake into your process of when you're looking at these guys and ranking them. And so I want to get you to address this. It's already disproven by this graphic, but there's still a lot of folks out there. It's kind of become I don't know. It's kind of a mythology now. I think you could say that in the recruiting industry in general, there's kind of some bias based on who offers. And this guy's going to jump up or this guy's going to move down based on the school that they commit to. Now, I know you've ranked guys in the past pretty highly that maybe don't have any offers, but can you kind of, just from your perspective, you can't speak for the entire industry and what they may do, obviously, but how much do you bake that in, if any, to your process?
So I think it's important to contextualize that a lot of the colleges and us, or like, at least I can just speaking for us at On3, like a lot of times we're looking at the same stuff. So like if a prospect's getting offers or has like a big spring, or say he runs a great track time, wins a state championship in the 100 meters and gets 10 offers at the same time, I think a lot of times the sample or just the data everybody's getting or the film, it kind of comes through at the same time. So it can kind of dovetail a little bit. Now we've had instances in the past where, like, I remember like when I was at 24/7, we ranked a offensive lineman going to Northwestern as a 5-star, and he's going to be a first rounder this year. So we are not scared at like where they signed does not matter to us. I think there is a correlation sometimes between guys with a bunch of offers from blue blood programs being the best players, but that's not something we factor in. I think it's, and some of it is, I think the context matters. Like for LaNorris Sellers, people would look at LaNorris Sellers' offer list and be like, okay, like what's going on here? Well, I mean, he missed his junior year, and 90% of the quarterbacks are committed by the time he's really, I would say, 98% of the quarterbacks are committed. Power 5 guys are committed by the time he's really taken off as a senior. Everybody kind of already has their quarterback, and most teams aren't going to drop their quarterback to make a move. I mean, it's just not something you see really common. So yeah, like there is crossover with offers, but I think if you were to rank by offers, you would be wrong a lot. That's just not, I think that's just not a great strategy. And I think too, if we were to reset a lot of these college boards, the offer list would look completely different. You think about the timeline of when these offers come in. It's like right now, February, spring. And so it's not super common to see a bunch of like senior offers, which really, like I said, to us, just from everything I've ever looked at, how they play as a senior is the best indicator. And if it was a deal where, we still had the February signing day, I think you could maybe see more of that. I think, back in the day, I'm sure y'all remember, like back in the day when college coaches could go to the Shrine Bowl, which I wish they could do that now. Like, you think
that was fun, man.
That were discovered at the Shrine Bowl. It's great for the players, but like when college coaches could go to all-star games and the evaluation was more in the senior year, I think it's a little different. Everything is so pushed up now, which I think it just changes the timeline, and it probably makes it more likely that some of these guys fly under the radar. And I think really to South Carolina's benefit, they landed some of those guys this year. And I think those guys are honestly like the headliners of their class. So, and I think that speaks to South Carolina's just the organization and ability to evaluate and pivot. I think, if you look at some past staffs at South Carolina, they might have dug their heels in on a guy like LaNorris Sellers. So I think it speaks to Beamer and the whole group to say, okay, like this guy's lighting it up. We can't let him lead the state. Like this is a potential, difference maker at the most important position on the field. So I think they deserve credit for that as well.
Yeah, Charles, I remember actually current South Carolina edges coach Sterling Lucas. This was when I first started being involved in this stuff, like blowing up, I think, at the Shrine Bowl. And that's when I was interning with scout.com, I guess, when I was like in college or something. But and now Sterling is an on-the-field coach at South Carolina.
Yeah.
I guess aging myself there a bit. But that was fun. There would be like coaches lined up on the sidelines in between the fields on both sides. And I kind of miss those days, guys. But I tell you what, Charles, a guy that I don't think we've talked about with you and just hasn't gotten the fanfare maybe you would expect. What can you tell us about DJ Braswell, the 4-star running back? The more I look at South Carolina's depth chart, the loss of Marshawn Lloyd, they get Mario Anderson from Newberry, but they were looking to get another portal guy. Maybe doesn't look great there right now. The more I look at it, the more I'm sitting there saying Braswell may get every chance to come in and play. Consensus 4-star guy. What can you tell us about Braswell, man?
I think that the first thing with Braswell is the combination of size and speed. He's a state champion in the 100 and 200 meters in Georgia. I saw him in person at that Atlanta camp about a year ago. He's a good 5'11", 200 plus. So I think just from the physical perspective, he has the ability, like he has the size and build to run between the tackles. I think when you look at running backs, I think size does matter. So I think he has the build you want and then the burst and speed to hit home runs. I don't think he played like on a great high school team, and it wasn't like a deal where he was like putting up gaudy stats, but when you watch the video, you can see a lot of stuff that translates, which is just with his ability to get to the edge, pick up chunk yards. So he was one, and I think the agility as well, his ability to cut, you can kind of see right there. He's not just a one cut guy. He can has good feet in the hole. I think from a skill perspective and just with his speed and athleticism, I think there's a lot to work with. I thought he caught the ball okay. I think he could improve there, just from seeing him catch in person in the camp setting. But it was not deficient at all. Like I think he's probably average, but that's something I think, once he gets on campus at South Carolina, that's something he'll probably continue to improve. But I think too, he's kind of in that area of South Georgia. I think South Carolina did a really good job in Georgia this year, just from an evaluation perspective, finding some guy, like being pretty early on guys, because we ranked Braswell as a 4-star. I feel like pretty early, and a lot of that was just going back and looking at his track times and watching his sophomore, junior stuff. But South Carolina was on him pretty quick, I think. So that was resourceful and I think a good evaluation. And the running back cycle is not crazy loaded this year. Like there's probably 3 for sure, kind of like top 50 types, and then a little bit of a drop off. So I think landing a top 300 running back this year is kind of what you would hope for if you were going to set reasonable expectations.
Wes, can we have time to pull up one more with Charles maybe that I wanted to ask about?
Yeah, if Charles is giving us 40 minutes, you got somewhere you got to be, Charles? Or
no, I'm good. I'm good.
You good, man?
Yep.
Have we talked with Pup Howard, but Charles about Pup Howard yet? Any?
I don't think so.
I don't think we've gotten as much of a detailed take. So obviously Pup, a guy that you have in the top 200 of the on 300, Charles. He's someone that went through bowl practice with South Carolina. Wes and I have already heard some pretty positive returns, not only about his personality but just his physique and how he looked during bowl practice. What do you think of Pup Howard? I think you've got him, pretty high. Again, top 200 kid. What do you like about his game?
Yeah, I think Pup Howard is a tackle machine. That's really kind of where we view his skill set. He is, I would think, one of the more productive, just volume tacklers in this linebacker group. I think he probably averaged like 10 tackles a game over the last couple years. So he's just very, very active. I think he's instinctive. The size, I think, sneaks up on people. I'm not sure if y'all have seen him in person, but I think he was initially maybe listed at like 6'2". I think he's closer to 6'4". I believe he's, around like 6'3 3/4, I think was the official measurement I had on him. Just a big guy. Good length. I think he is primarily just like a Mike kind of in the box linebacker. For us, we really value if you're kind of like projecting. A lot of our rankings are really NFL draft, ultimately like ultimate projections. But so I think some linebackers that are ahead of him are probably guys who are just have the verified speed and athleticism. But I think from just a pure linebacker perspective, he's very good in that regard. I think he's going to be like a starting middle linebacker at South Carolina, a guy who can call the defense. Obviously, y'all mentioned it. His personality, and I think just leadership abilities are everything I've heard are just like off the charts. So I think he's just that kind of stalwart, like defensive captain type. And probably, honestly, I think his value to the team is more evident. It's going to be more evident, I think, than where he's ranked, if that makes sense. Like we rank these very like objectively. It's like athleticism, because we don't have all of the personality info on all of these prospects. And I think from my experience, if you start trying to play psychologist, you can make a lot of mistakes. So we kind of just go off what we have, like what we know. And I think it just really is just how they play for us and how they project. But I think Pup Howard is one, and people might look at our ranking and say, well, they have Pup Howard too low. And if they were going to say that, I wouldn't really argue with you. But I think his value to South Carolina is going to outweigh what he where he's ranked or what he does on the field. To be honest, I think he's kind of a thermostat leader from everything I've heard. So I think he's a guy that you just want to have in your program, and I do think he's going to be a really good player for South Carolina too, at a position of need.
Charles, final thing I got for you here, man. And again, we appreciate the time. I know you're not really on the reporter side of things anymore, but what either on the field or just buzz have you heard about Nick Harbor? Obviously, Gamecock fans have they've selected him as the guy they always want to talk about for this class, rightfully so. Yeah. Anytime we can just say the words Nick Harbor, 10 additional viewers just pop up. It's like magic. So what can you tell us about Nick and some thoughts there, man, just on him as a freaky athlete?
Yeah, I mean, since I've been doing this, he is one of the more unique prospects that I've evaluated. I think watching him as a senior, I really had some legitimate questions about the ball skills and just how he projected to offense. Just very undeveloped there. And I kind of viewed him more like I was kind of went into the week at Under Armour thinking, okay, like he probably needs to try to play defense. I think long term, just but obviously his speed is special. He's 6'5", 225 with a 10.2 800 meters like that. I've never seen a size and speed combination like that from a high school prospect ever. So that's all to kind of say, or just kind of lead up to, that was kind of my thought process going into seeing him at Under Armour. And honestly, I left Under Armour almost like more confused about him in a way, but kind of in a good way. So like he was running past top corners like they were tied up out there. He didn't always catch the ball clean, but also I think I only saw him have one drop. So it wasn't always pretty, but he was coming down with it. But it was unique to see a guy with that size. I mean, the size is legitimate for sure. He might weigh more than 225, but I think he looks a good 6'5", like long arms, just really he's like a creative player physically, basically. And then And I think the ability to run vertical is definitely unique. Think like a DK Metcalf type, a guy who's just huge and is going to outrun corners. But one thing that impressed me as well, in addition to just like the fact that he didn't put the ball on the ground a ton, even though he was body catching a good bit, was I think you kind of can maybe like stereotype track athletes as, okay, like they're just straight line sprinters and don't have a lot of lateral agility. He had some lateral agility, like some shake when he was like sticking his foot in the ground in his route running. I thought his route running was a pleasant surprise, especially for a guy who's probably not trained a ton at receiver or tight end. So he's one, like, I think he was a guy who was probably kind of on that like range of, okay, if we have a bunch of prospects who, you know, look better than him, he can maybe get bumped out of the 5-star conversation. But we after that week, we're like, okay, we have to keep him as a 5-star because his upside is just so high, and it's just not common. You see a guy with that size just running past all these top corners. So I think just from his recruitment, y'all are probably more up to speed on this than me, and I haven't been keeping up with it daily, but I think Oregon had a little buzz with him out there. They were one that I think entered the mix there, but you know, with him, he's got time. I don't think he's got time to go on visits and whatnot. But I think Oregon was a school that was previously not mentioned a ton, but was getting in the mix. And I think they have some appeal with, their track background, Nike and just I think he ran in a track meet there before. So I'm not sure if he's like, I guess he hasn't visited there yet, but or maybe he did last weekend. But I think they were one to maybe watch as kind of a late entrant into his recruitment. So that's I guess that's the most reporting I can add.
Okay, yeah. Well, that checks our Nicholas Harbor box for this show. But man, but hey, here's the thing. Everybody has talked about with him, is he like an edge pass rush guy or a tight end? Charles, I'm sitting there saying, let's just slide him a little bit farther out on offense, put him out there, and let these 5'11" corners. Like, what do you even do with that? You know what I mean? Like, everybody says tight end. I think wide receiver is very intriguing, just because he would be such a mismatch if you flex him all the way out there and get him out of the box a little bit, in my opinion. Yeah,
I mean, he has the skill set of basically like a Z receiver. Like, almost think like for Gamecock fans, you kind of think of a Demir Bird, but he's 6'5" is kind of what you would think of.
Yeah.
So I think you could definitely use him that way, and at least maybe early. It might take him a while to kind of like learn how to play as an inline tight end. Like, that's probably a little bit of a projection. I mean, tight end's a tough position to play early in college or the NFL because there's so many different skills and roles you need to have to be like an every down tight end. You think about it. I mean, a lot of these guys in high school, they're either pass catchers or blockers. Most of your blockers aren't going to be the high end athletes. So it might take a while for tight ends to come in and just be like a true every down guy. Like, I don't think you see that a ton. Like a Brock Bowers is pretty rare, and Brock Bowers is more of like kind of just like an athlete guy. They move around, but I mean, I think if you want a Nick Harbor to make an instant impact, I would just stick him on the outside and say, hey man, like, run a 9 route. And like you can pull a safety over. Like, that's a huge factor in college football. I think if you look at some of these teams that really give defenses trouble, like you look at Georgia, for instance, when they put Arian Smith on the field in the college football playoff, that completely kind of almost like broke Ohio State's defense a little bit with his ability to stretch the field. So if you have that guy on your team, and I think if you look at past South Carolina teams as well, if you have that guy that can stretch the field, it changes your offense completely. So at the minimum, he has that value, and then that's considerable. So
yeah, and I think college coaches are saying, let's just land this guy, and then he can line up wherever he wants. Like, yeah, you can choose when you get here. We'll figure it out, but let's get him in the boat first. So that will be intriguing to watch. Charles, man, well, you have been more than gracious with your time. We appreciate it as always. Love the rankings talk. Love the philosophical talk about what goes into the rankings, and appreciate what you do, man. Hey, let's do this again soon, okay?
Sounds good. See y'all.
Awesome. Thanks, Charles. That's Charles Power. Go check out his work on On3, of course. And we're going to break up. If you missed this, we'll be back on. I would say check the YouTube page, Gamecock Central YouTube page. Chris, I think this is a prime episode to maybe chop up into some different segments. But we got a few minutes left. Let's do our guest review. What did you learn today, Chris?
Well, I really liked asking. You probably noticed I had kind of a generalized theme today of trying to dig a little bit deeper into kind of what goes into these rankings and, the dual threat versus, pro style kind of classification. I mean, we haven't gotten that question a lot, Wes, but we still get it some. Hey, South Carolina's recruiting this guy. Is he a dual threat or is he a, pro style guy? And so you can kind of now from a ranking standpoint, at least on On3, you can just kind of say, well, he's neither. He's just a quarterback. But generally even you say, well, I mean, he's a dual threat. He can run, but a lot of guys now that you see, Wes, are going to be able to do both. Like, look at the college football playoff quarterbacks. Stetson Bennett, super mobile. Max Duggan from TCU could run. CJ Stroud could run. And then who am I leaving out? Michigan. Yeah. Michigan's guy, not as much. But Michigan's like, I like Spencer Hall's explanation, apply sledgehammer until desired results. Like their offense, a little bit more old school than what you see now. But JJ McCarthy, I think maybe I'm sliding him.
Yeah.
Yeah, he can. Yeah. Well, I think he can run. But everybody has a baseline mobility. There's no more statues. If you're a statue, you're not playing.
That's or you better be a genius at like picking apart what's happening, and then you better be accurate as all you know what.
Yeah.
I think there's just levels to it. Like some guys are gonna just move around just enough, and then some guys, a lot of these guys, man, are way more athletic than they're given credit for.
Oh, absolutely.
And it used to be, I think that's a great change, man, because it used to be, this guy can run, he's a dual threat, so that means he can't throw. It was like there's a connotation there. There's some certain things about just people would automatically get made dual threat, and it's like, oh, well, they can't throw the football. That's not the case. And I liked his point too about that gives you a certain edge in getting comfortable into a scheme, but still being effective while I think we saw that with Connor Shaw, man. He was a pretty good quarterback before he became a really good passer, I feel like. So and that part of his game got better and better.
Yep.
And he sort of added it in with the dual threat ability. Spencer Rattler, his biggest plays this year have been by making incredibly beautiful, crazy throws, but a lot of times it's been by buying time with his feet as well. So the best quarterbacks aren't really I can only throw, but they're not really the run first. They're the guys that can marry it together. And I think that's what we're seeing with these rankings. But also, man, I think gives you a clearer idea. LaNorris Sellers, number 8 quarterback in the country. In the past, Carolina has gotten top 10 quarterbacks, but you were dividing it among dual threat and pro style. You're talking about number 8 quarterback in his class, according to On3. Period. End of story. There are basically, you can take 10 quarterbacks in this class, and according to On3, Sellers is among that group, which is that's special, man. I'm telling you, if this kid hadn't got hurt 8th grade, it would have been an absolute dogfight for Carolina to land him, and he'd be the guy that we were writing confidentials and insider reports about every other week, I feel like.
Yeah, so there was a good bit of excitement about this kid in Gamecock country, leading up, but probably not enough. And so On3 is an outlier in the way that they view Sellers. I have a feeling some others are going to catch up, maybe not number 95 in the country, but I think some others will move him up some more. I don't know everybody's ranking schedule. I don't even know On3's ranking schedule until here it is. It came out yesterday. But as an example, so he mentioned national recruits, like seeing Sellers alongside some national recruits at Clemson's camp a couple years ago. Sellers, according to On3, is now ranked higher than Eli Holstein and Dylan Lonergan, both of Alabama's quarterback signees, He's ranked higher than Clemson signee Christopher Vizina, which has been considered a big-time guy. And Wes, very interestingly, ranked a good bit higher, by 80 spots higher than Jaden Rashada, who's been in the news a lot lately. Jaden Rashada checking in at number 176 in the On300. So, yeah, this is a big-time recruit. And I also, going back to things that we learned, like you put up 3 guys in that graphic, that really cool graphic on the screen, Kilgore, Swain, Sellers, all kind of more like resourceful gets for South Carolina. Like Swain, you beat Colorado and like Vanderbilt and a few others. Kilgore had Clemson, Florida, Oklahoma, right? Some bigger schools, and Sellers was Syracuse, right? But look at where all these guys are. 2 of them are in the top 100. One of them's top 175. And all of them were super productive high school players that all play, the most important position on the field. And then a couple guys at a position of need at DB for some potential early playing time. So resourceful gets by the Gamecock staff. And 2 of them, as Charles mentioned, out of the state of Georgia, where they did a really good job this year.
Yeah, man, I left this conversation, so I've been in a little bit of depth chart mode because I am putting together like a projected spring depth chart for offense, defense, and it's way too early to really know on a lot of these spots. But my next step is to put out the defensive one, and not all these guys are here yet. Swain isn't, Kilgore is, but hearing Charles talk about some of these guys, I already found myself sort of, fair or not, they got to get to campus. We got to see what they can do. They got to get through a practice first, right? But I found myself sort of saying, now, if Kilgore is as good as he thinks he is, as good as Charles thinks he is, not as good as Jalon. That's not like a shot. If Kilgore is as good as Charles thinks he is, and watching that senior film, that was the first time I'd seen the senior film. He's actually a pretty dynamic athlete, man. He's probably going to be on the 2 deep at safety as a true freshman. Like, I think he's probably that good. And then you look at Swain, he's probably on the 2 deep as a freshman at corner or wide receiver. Like, and don't get me wrong, the full plan right now, by all indications, is cornerback, it's DB. But we know how quickly that can sometimes change.
Yeah.
I know this is one of the few guys Chris wants at receiver. However, I agree, man, but also I'm looking at corner and I'm like,
I'm with you.
If Vicari is as good as the number 51 overall prospect in the country, and he can bring some additional physicality to the cornerback spot, depending on the development of some of these other guys, I mean, he very well may just come in and be too good not to start, like much less play. Like I could see him taking a spot eventually. Yeah. At the very least, it's gonna depend on, I think, Chris, the development. What does Emory Floyd do this offseason? What does Anthony Rose do this offseason? How much does Keenan Nelson improve after, we kind of got to feel for their thought process. Keenan playing the nickelback spot in the bowl game, played, I think, every snap that the nickel was on the field. DQ playing safety alongside Nick. There's a lot to sort through, and there's plenty of time to do it. But that secondary just feels like some of these guys we're talking about are going to have every opportunity to be on the field in some way coming up next season.
And a couple things on Swain. I mean, he is the only one out of these other 2 guys are already on campus. So Swain's a summer enrollee, I believe. And I agree with you, man. I mean, I'm actually conflicted. I know I said receiver, but that is because, like, this is really truly a guy that you could play him either way, and you understand. You're like, yeah, I could see that. It's just when you watch him on film, and you'll watch him run a route, and you're like, oh god, like wow, But then you understand the size, speed, the athleticism, the length, the need, like all of that makes sense. Plus, I think Torian Gray kind of claimed him early. It's like, yeah, this is my guy.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I asked one of my guys, man, like one of the people I trust, like their opinion, and I was expecting them to be like, that guy's too good to not put him on offense. Got the opposite response. It was he could help South Carolina like off the jump at corner. So that kind of,
Yeah.
I'm conflicted as well. But it's a good problem to have. And
Yeah.
can we just for one moment just look at this graphic and just, man, that thing looks pretty up there.
It does look good. Did you make that?
Heck no, I did not. Shout out to our On3 graphic team, I should say. I think Marina, who does a fantastic job for On3, made that. So shout out. That thing's pretty, man. All right, we're out of time. Appreciate Charles. That was awesome. The beauty of having Charles on, just get him rolling. That guy can talk about rankings forever. So great detail. You can tell. I think that was good for fans, Chris, because these rankings aren't just like, oh yeah, that guy's a 4-star. Oh, that's a 5-star. Oh, that's a 3-star. Let's just slap the detail and the sort of indicators, I think is a good word for it. Positive indicators, negative indicators that go into those decisions. How do you rank this guy? How do you rank that guy? And it's easy for us as South Carolina media or South Carolina fans to be like, oh, that guy's clearly a 4-star. And it's like, but you're not watching film of the other thousands.
Yeah. Literally.
Yeah. So it's a tough job. Like I get it's very easy to get on Twitter and be like, oh, this is BS. How's this guy not? It's not an easy job. All the guys they're ranking are pretty good at football.
Yeah.
Like very few films do you pop on and be like, man, that guy sucks. Like,
that's what people don't like. Even if somebody is a 4-star, even a 3-star, like I had someone brought up a player the other day and said, why this guy should be a 5-star. And I'm like, well, he's a top 200 player. That means that's literally telling a guy you will be an NFL draft pick. That is a compliment of the highest order. That just means you may not be a first rounder. If you consider that a diss,
yeah,
I got nothing for you. But
well, everything's a diss nowadays, Chris. So
that's right.
Anyway, all right, y'all. We are out of time. Appreciate it. And I hope y'all enjoyed that as much as we did. I thought that was really good. If you're a roster building or recruiting nerd like we are, that was really good stuff. So appreciate y'all joining. Appreciate Charles as always. For Chris, I'm Wes. We'll talk to you soon.